Hi, Jackie.
Hey, how's it going, Melissa? I'm glad to be joining you today. Thank you for having me.
And thank you for agreeing to come and share your story. I'm so excited to talk to you more and learn more about your journey. And as I always start my podcast, what is your earliest memory of money?
My earliest memory of money was when I was a kid. I'm thinking I was in elementary school. Maybe I was like 8 or 9 years old. And I lived out in the country in rural South Carolina. And we had this big blackberry patch in our backyard. And I remember whenever the season came for blackberries, we would put on our long sleeves, because you have the thorns, and we would pick blackberries. We would get like the quart jars, and we would fill up the jars with blackberries and go sell them to the neighbors. And I think I remember we sold them like $1 or $1.50 a quart, but they got a nice quart of blackberries and we got paid for it. I just remember a lot of work that we did, and not to mention, getting stuck with the thorns and then going to our neighbor's house and hoping that someone would have pity on us and want some blackberries. And that was probably the first experience that I had where I was able to exchange my time and a product for money. So I guess I was the little salesperson.
Yeah, I'm curious, as you were saying that, did that kind of um frame your idea of making money as something that you have to work for? You said you were getting stuck with thorns. Like, was it hard to make money? Like, what kind of things were forming in your mind?
Yeah, it felt kind of hard for me, but I did feel good that I was doing something that made money because I was raised by a single dad with 6 kids. So that was a little part of me that, said, oh, I can try to do this on my own, or I could actually earn some money myself. So it just stuck with me that however hard the work was or whatever, it was just neat to see it come full circle where I sold it, I got my money, and then I went and bought candy from the store. But that memory just kind of stuck with me. Just that's how it works. You produce something, whether it's from your time, your energy, whatever product it is, somebody else wants it and they'll pay you for it.
Yeah. Did your dad teach you this? How did you learn, you should get your own job? You said you had other siblings, so was it
Yeah.
that you just wanted to have your own? Like, where did you have the thought to begin working?
Yeah, I think so. It was 6 of us. I was number 5 out of 6. And it was my older siblings that taught me that. They had probably moved past it sooner than I did, but we all kind of did it together. I have one younger sister, so we'd be out there picking together. And then my older siblings, I'm pretty sure we just, learned it from them. But I remember I had to be brave enough to go knocking on the neighbor's door and see if they wanted to buy blackberries. Um, so yeah, I guess I learned from my older siblings that that's what you do, and you get rewarded for it.
Nice, nice. So with it being the six of you being raised by a single dad, like what was that experience like for him, if you can, recall what he was going through, but just raising his kids on his own? Do you recall him speaking to you about the financial situation he was in or explaining anything regarding money?
Yeah, when I think back, this is what makes me remember how taboo it is to talk about money. So we never talked about those things. Um, the things that he did had a much greater impact on me. So I remember seeing him go to work every day. Um, I never remember him missing a day because he was sick. I didn't even know what a sick day was until I was in my 20s and I got around other people at work. He always had a second job. I knew he got paid on Thursdays. And that meant that, Wednesday night, the refrigerator was empty because the next day was grocery day. So those are the things that I learned from my dad really at a young age. And, we take in so much when we're young that actually sticks with us, because my dad, he passed away when I was 18, about 3 months before I graduated from high school. So everything that I learned from him about money and otherwise, it came before I was 18. So when I was really, really young, but so many of the things that I learned from him stuck with me throughout my life, even though after 18, he was gone.
My goodness. So yeah, it like you can't wait until your kids are young, are older. You just show
Right.
by example, like you were saying, you were just watching him and just learning along the way. But it's amazing. He still left a good impact on you, and I'm
He
sure taught you
did.
a lot about work ethic and putting in your work, like you started off by saying, putting in your time to putting in your effort to make the money.
Yeah,
Um,
there were so many things that did stick with me. And I think at the time I wasn't paying much attention, and it's only on reflection when I became an adult that I realized a lot of those things. So
what other things can you say you learned from him?
I think, and I kind of surmise, in summary, I just always say that to have good money habits, you don't have to be wealthy. And so some of the things that I learned from my dad that actually helped me on my financial journey was things like he didn't really like having debt. And back then they would call it, paying on time, where you would pay a little bit at a time. Obviously there were certain things where, he had to, like, if you're going to get a vehicle, you might have to get a loan for that, but he really wasn't a big believer in debt. And so when I was in college, I didn't get a student loan until like my third year of college because of what he taught me. And that helped me as I started, after college, where I didn't have a ton of student loan debt. And so that was a really good habit that he taught me. Certainly his work ethic was unbelievable. And all of my siblings have that, that stuck with them as well. So there were so many little things, the old saying, live on less than you earn and invest the difference. You hear so many versions of that. Well, he taught us that as well. I didn't really know what it meant growing up, but I heard it again and again. So, so yeah, there were so many things I learned from him growing up, and most of it was from watching him and seeing what he did and him just setting a good example versus him like sitting down and trying to explain something to me, because again, I was pretty young. So probably that wouldn't have stuck with me as good as just like watching it.
Yeah,
Mhm.
so you kind of already went into it, but having learned these things, it set you up for young adulthood. And so after college, as you started living life as a young adult, what were your experiences with managing your money, like your first job after college and just doing the adulting things? Like what kind of experiences did you have? Do you feel you always stuck to the things he taught you, or can you remember any mishaps or negative decisions you made on your journey with money at that time?
Yeah, I made a ton of mistakes. I did a lot of things wrong. Growing up in poverty, and we were in poverty, we were in the free lunch program, and it wasn't the greatest experience in terms of, all the other kids have new clothes. Why do I have to wear hand-me-downs? Things like that. So when I guess one of the biggest decisions that I made was to go to college. And my dad, he never got to see me graduate from high school. He never got to see me go to college, but he always wanted better for me and my siblings than he had. He only had a sixth grade education, but he knew how important that was. So he instilled that in us. So I think he would have been really proud that I did go to college. But the funny thing was, when I graduated, my first real job at a college was working for Walmart headquarters in Bentonville, Arkansas. Now, that was a big move because I grew up in South Carolina. I had no idea how I was going to pay for the cost of a move or get an apartment or whatever. I had no plan. and I was right out of college, so the student loans were due. It wasn't crazy, but I was worried about that. I wish I'd had done my digging, because you can, defer your student loans, and I certainly needed to do that. But I just remember working for, Walmart. They basically would pay for a yellow Ryder truck and a hitch to put your car on the back. And I ended up having to make that drive myself. I didn't have family that could actually go with me. Now, my brother, he actually helped me hook my car up. He guided me as I backed up out of the driveway to make this scary, lonely trip to start my first job. And I just remember it was raining that day. And I remember it was raining because I was literally starting to cry as I left, thinking, I cannot do this. I didn't even have a plan. So it took me 2 days to make the drive, but I'm in this big Ryder truck alone. It was 14 hours. I split it up into 2 days. And by the time I got to Arkansas, I didn't have an apartment lined up. Didn't know that I needed a security deposit, or like you had to put money down to get your utilities turned on. All of those things, I had no idea. I was just on a wing and a prayer. And so my dad, he would probably say, you need to have a plan, you need to, figure this out. And I just figured it out once I got to Bentonville, Arkansas, where I knew no one. I was in a brand new place, no family, no friends. All I had was a job. And I just had to figure it out from there. But that was a rough start. It was a really rough start. I never had my own apartment before. So many new things. But I guess the one good thing was that, I had a job. I was making my own money, and I had to figure this stuff out. So, yeah.
Interesting. Yeah. So it was a rough start, especially not going somewhere where you know no one, and have no support. It's so you explaining how your brother helped you back up, back the Ryder truck up is so that's such a vivid memory.
Yeah.
But I can, but I can that was important to share because I could see how that is. Like literally you driving down crying and just making your way and to this new state to start anew. And so you finally get yourself together and get some type of footing. Were you ready to start saving like with your first new job and after you got yourself settled, did you start developing those savings habits and things like that, or did that come a little later?
That came a little later. So as I'm living in Arkansas, I started dating my boyfriend at the time, but we ended up getting married. He was in the military, and he was, I think, stationed in Arizona, and I was in Arkansas. And we did get married though. And I really didn't do much saving. I just remember I had a coworker to say, you work for Walmart. Walmart is a publicly traded company, and they offered a 15% discount when you buy Walmart stock as an employee. And everybody told me, yeah, you can't beat that deal. You should do that. So I don't recall that they had a 401k or anything, but I did set it up through payroll deduction where I brought Walmart stock at a 15% discount. So that was a pretty good deal. But besides that, I probably had an emergency fund. And in my mind, it was because I didn't have family or anyone else that could bail me out. So it was all on me. Like if I needed a new tire, if I needed something happened with my car, I had to be able to pay for that myself. And so the emergency fund was really, really important to me. So there was a couple things that I did. I really wasn't focused that much on it. Um, Probably a little bit later is when I really was more conscientious and purposeful about saving and investing, and kind of knew how that would serve me down the road. I was just kind of living for today.
Yeah, I speak to with so many people and during that time it's just like you don't some people don't even know there's something they can do about their financial situation. Like take control of it. You might have a emergency savings, you might not, but a lot of the time people are just taking it day by day. Um, were you gonna say something?
Yeah, I was gonna say, so this was, I graduated from college in the 90s. So we didn't have the internet, we didn't have smartphones. I think about it, I have this 14-hour drive. You just had to keep turning the dial on the radio until you found a local station. So it wasn't like it is now. Like now, when I take a long trip, I I'm on my Bluetooth. I'm catching up on calls. I could even take a meeting if I wanted to. So that speeds up the time. But back then, you didn't have any of that. I remember these big atlases, and that's how you figured out where you're going. So there was no GPS, there was no Google Maps or anything like that. So I'm just thinking about, how the trip was and how we learned about things. So I didn't have the internet, didn't have social media, didn't have community groups or online stuff. You'd have to kind of go to the library, if that. When I was in college, though, they did have computers and stuff. So at this time, we didn't even have all the information widely available like it is today. So a lot of things I didn't know. I didn't know how to do a network statement. I didn't really call it emergency fund, but I knew I had to save something in case things went wrong. Um, so there was a lot that if you had to dig a little harder to learn certain things than you have to do now. If somebody asks me a question or I want to learn about something, I'm going to go straight on my phone. I'm going to Google it. I'm going to, chat GPT or something like that instantly. And so that's a big difference from when I was trying to, make my way, as a young adult then versus now.
And you also don't know what you don't know. And sometimes you don't know you should be looking into improving your financial habits or that there are solutions to those things. So when the student is ready, the teacher will come, right? So a lot of times people don't know the solutions to their problems. A lot of times they do. But I'm thinking back to when you're referring to where like the information or like somebody's post about financial literacy might not have come up on your timeline. And so where do you learn that? So that brings me to my next question. When did you begin your journey into like financial literacy and empowering yourself with knowledge and doing the right things?
Yeah, that was a pretty vivid moment in my life. So while I was in Arkansas, I did get married. And shortly after my husband got out of the military, we moved for a job that he got in Ohio. So we moved from Arkansas to Ohio. And as soon as I got to Ohio, I was pregnant. So I had my daughter, and we were the, big happy family for a long time. And after about 12 years, we ended up getting a divorce. But during all this time, I'm feeling pretty safe, pretty secure. We both worked, got my daughter, live in the, big, happy family. Everything was rosy. And when we got divorced, I had to rethink everything because what I thought was a shared journey was now just me. And I thought a lot about how do I make sure I'm going to be okay? My daughter's going to be okay. And growing up in poverty, it's a mindset too. And I just was running so hard away from, being in poverty. And I just never wanted to revisit that. I never wanted my daughter to know poverty the way that I did growing up. So that was the first thing that popped in my head. And, if anyone has ever gone through divorce or knows someone that's going through divorce, it is devastating, financially, emotionally, you rethink your entire life. It changes the whole trajectory of your life. So that was a huge deal. And it took about 2 years to kind of get over it. And you're never truly over it, but I guess get to the point where I could actually start doing something different and addressing my fears. So I had to ask myself that really hard question, like, what now? What do I like to do? And finally, when I spent some time thinking about that question, I was always curious about the stock market. It was such an odd thing. So I entered into personal finance probably from an angle that most people don't. You start thinking about investing after you do the basics, your budget, you get rid of your debt. But I was so interested in stock. So I was talking to a friend at work one day. I remember her name was Catherine. She lived in Boston, and I was in Ohio. We're on the phone talking one day, and she invested in stock. So of course I was picking her brain, and she told me about this nonprofit organization called Better Investing. And she was like, yeah, they support investing clubs. And there's probably one in your area. Just Google it. So at this point, we do have Google at least. So I Googled it. And there was one in the area that I lived in. And it was called a model club. I'm like, what does that mean? So a model club is just basically where the meetings are open to the public, and they operate in the ideal way that an investment club should operate. And they represented, the organization. They invested real money, but the nonprofit part of it supported those investment clubs. So I went to a few meetings, and I was always so interested. I thought these people were so smart, and they're talking about things that I thought was fun. They were talking about great companies and leadership, and it was all about long-term investing. So no day trading or options or anything like that, just having great companies, being an owner. I love the idea of owning part of the company, voting your proxy and things like that. I just nerded out on it. And I went to probably 4 or 5 meetings. They met once a month. And I chatted with a lot of the members over time. We went to lunch and stuff. And I said, yeah, I'd be interested in joining the club. And so when I did that, in order to be a member of the club, you had to present a stock, and they gave me a mentor and everything. And I remember that stock was FactSet. And I'd never heard of that company, but they basically do like analysis and reports for people on Wall Street. But anyway, it enlightened me a lot. I learned a lot, and everyone in the club was smarter than me. But I got my curiosity satisfied. So then I started going back and saying, okay, I'm no longer afraid of the stock market. I'm learning all this stuff about finances. Why am I not maxing out my 401k and maxing out my Roth and maxing out my health savings account? So I ended up having to backtrack because I started sort of at a level that, or from a position that most people don't start. So I backtrack with, okay, let me do these other things to make sure I'm taking advantage of that as well. So that was the big eye opener for me. And so even though a divorce is devastating and everything, that was a very pivotal moment in my life. And it did change the trajectory of things for me. And probably the most tangible thing that really got me was when you get a divorce, basically the judge or the process, they put all the retirement money, all the assets in one pot, and they split it down the middle. And so I remember looking at our 401k statements. We made similar income, similar salaries, got a similar match. And I had $20,000 in my 401k, and I'm in my mid 30s at this point. And my husband, he had $120,000. So he had $100,000 more than I did in his account. And as time went on, I figured out, kind of a few of the things that made a difference. But the biggest thing was that the gap kept growing and compounding. So he was investing in more aggressive things. He actually worked for a very large bank. And this was 2003, 2004, maybe 2005, when banks were doing really well. Well, that was one of the things he was invested in. And then as his salary got inched up more than mine, then of course his 6% that he was putting in was more than my 6% because he was making more. So all these little nuances over 10 years adds up. And it did. So it wasn't one big thing that made the difference. It was all these little things that just that just compounded over time. So yeah, that was a thing that I saw, and I felt so financially ignorant. And that was really the time that I said, I never want to feel this way again. And I vowed to never, never be that financially ignorant again. And that was kind of what snapped me out of it and had me realizing I needed to do something different.
And what you're sharing is something that I've learned in my studies, the financial therapy studies, and I know you've gone through it as well, but the information about women and money. And women, a lot of the time, just don't take the time or initiative to be on top of their money. Whether it's because of something they weren't raised to do, or they just defer those responsibilities to their husband. But the statistics show, half of the time people are getting divorced. A lot of the time women become widowed and, spend more time alone in old age and are caretakers. Sometimes they have to leave their job to take care of their kids or their elderly parents. And so because of all this, women do not have the luxury of ignoring their finances and being ignorant with their money. It's a must that we have to be aware and educated in these ways. So what you're saying is definitely very true. A lot of times, it's not until a life experience that women do take their finances more seriously.
Yeah, I had to go back and recreate a lot of this, but I fell squarely in that stereotype of women not paying attention to their finances. And I remember I read a Bank of America study that they did some research. I think it was back in maybe 2020, 2021 or something like that. But it was in the workplace where they were showing that there was such a huge disparity in 401k balances between women and men. And I fell right in the middle. Actually, mine was a bit worse, having that $100,000 difference. So that was just interesting to me. I'm like, wow, I had no idea like that type of research existed, but I'm like, okay, I guess this confirms that this happens more than I thought. And I kind of just, was in sort of that same category as many women are. So, but I'm glad I did wake up and I started making a change just a little bit at first, but that it starts to add up. And when you're really curious, as soon as you find the answer to one thing, you want to know more and more and more. And that's what happened.
Yeah, like you said, you went into the stocks and then kind of worked backwards to improve your financial situation. So, you had a club that helped you throughout your journey. Did the club only focus on stock investing, or did they also touch on basic money management and other financial topics?
Yeah, it was primarily single stock investing. And I think the average person, they're fine with just straight up index funds. And the majority of my portfolio now is just a straight up index fund. But I like to nerd out on that. So this club was perfect for me. And as far as the other general personal finance, that just naturally came up. And, this community of people, they remind me a lot of like the FIRE community. FIRE stands for Financial Independence, Retire Early, because as you're talking to people, it's not just about, investing in a stock or investing in the stock market. It's about everything else that surrounds that. Like, how do you create enough money to be able to invest? How do you grow your wealth? You have to invest it somehow. So the main thing the club did for me, we pooled our money together. We invested in companies. We voted on the stocks, and we did that, of course. But the biggest takeaway for me was that I wasn't afraid to invest anymore. I wasn't afraid of the stock market. I learned that you cannot save yourself to wealth. You have to invest. You can't have your money sitting in a checking account that'll get eaten up by inflation. So you have to find a way to get it to grow at a faster pace. And that's when I started going back to all the other things. And I think that might have helped me along the way as well, or helped speed up my journey a little bit, because I think, like you were saying, for a lot of women, the investing piece, they may be a little more timid or not as aggressive. And so that piece is not growing fast enough. And so when I got to the point where I was investing, I knew how to invest. I wasn't afraid of it anymore. I think that helped my nest egg grow a little faster because I got, once I got divorced, I started really like amping up that investing. And this was no genius. I'm no genius or anything, but I started a lot of that heavy investing, maxing out everything in 2008, which turned out to be a really good time to start investing. But I wasn't afraid of it. I was working at, in 2008, everything, real estate market was crashing, the stock market was crashing and all of that, but I was still investing. It didn't scare me like I know it did a lot of people. A lot of people, took their money out of their 401k, they stopped investing. But with the investment club, we talked a lot about how this was actually a really good time to be investing. So it worked out really well. Again, a lot of things are just luck and timing, but the timing was good. It was 2008. And that's when I started doing a lot of my heavy lifting. And that ended up making a huge difference.
Yeah, and definitely having a support group and people who know what they're doing and can support you and not making adverse decisions is important. So you had those to help you in the positive direction, but do you remember any financial mistakes you've had? Like, what would you say is the biggest mistake you've made?
Yeah, I made a lot of little ones, probably some big ones too. Here's the thing I'm thankful for. I'm thankful that the most of the mistakes that I made them when I was young and didn't have much money. Things like in 1999, the dot-com bubble. So I remember me and my husband, we started just investing, any stock or a company that had .com at the end of their name, it just went to the roof or it went to the moon. It went to the moon. So I remember a stock that I brought. It was called salon.com. I barely knew what they did. Uh, and I think I brought like $1,000 worth. I don't even remember how many shares it was. And it went down and went down and went down. So 1999, 2000, all these tech stocks, they're going down. A few survived, not many. And that $1,000, I think, ended up going down to about $80 before I decided to sell it. And I just gave up on it. So I'm like, well, I guess I can sell it and we can go have dinner or something. But that was a big mistake. And $1,000 at the time, that was a lot of money. But I'm really glad that I learned that lesson sooner because it definitely could have been a lot worse if I had a lot more money. Another thing that I remember that sort of shifted the way that I did things going forward was when I was in college. I mean, I was a poor college kid. I don't even know how I was able to afford payments for a new car, which was a horrible decision. It's like, if I'm already struggling and I'm in college, why on earth am I buying a car? I don't know. It made no sense. So I remember the car payments was $326 a month. And it was only a few months before I realized, oh my God, I can't make this payment. So I think I might have squeezed out maybe a few more months. I had the car for maybe 6 months, maybe even a year. And so I'm like, I cannot make this payment anymore. So I need to see if I can refinance it or something. So I go to the bank. I meet with the person. I remember the person had a cubicle and then I was sitting in the chair outside of it. And I was asking to have the car refinanced because I couldn't afford the payment. So she pulls up something on her computer and she says, we can't refinance this because you owe more on the car than it's worth. And I felt so horrible because I'm like, what am I going to do? And I remember I just left, went into my $326 a month car payment and just cried because I had no idea was what I was going to do. And I don't even know how I got myself into that. It was ridiculous. So that was the first and only new car I ever bought because they can get upside down almost immediately. And I just found smarter ways to do it. I'd rather buy a car that's maybe 3 or 4 years old, where somebody else is taking the depreciation, get one with reasonable payments, or just pay cash for it. I actually got to that point. So I've saved a lot of money from then to now by just buying my cars smarter. But that lesson, it felt so bad that, I knew I never wanted to feel like that again. And so that saved me. So I made a lot of stupid mistakes like that. And these days, I almost don't even call them mistakes anymore. They're just lessons that hopefully I learned something from them and I wised up.
Yeah. So what would you say, we're getting towards the end? Thank you so much. And having that experience, 300 something dollars in college is a lot. So I can
Yeah.
imagine what you were
And this
feeling.
was the 90s, Melissa. This was the 90s. So that was a heck of a lot of money. And I don't think I had an idea of just how much that was. I guess since they approved me for the loan, I could afford it. And on top of that, I remember going shopping for it. And I might have had a boyfriend at the time or whatever, but we were there together. And for some reason, I thought that you couldn't negotiate the price of a new car. And of course, the car salesman isn't going to tell me anything different. So I paid sticker price for the car too. This is silly.
It is. I mean, and it's makes you sick to your stomach sometimes when you think about what you've done.
Yeah.
But thank God for growth, thank God for progress and learning from your mistakes. And so there's so many people going through that now. I think the average car payment is in the 700. So probably
Yeah.
the what that was in the 90s for you. So these are problems people have had and will continue to have, and why we are so important out here. So, if you could go back and give your younger self some advice, or give someone who is going through their financial journey right now some advice, what would that be?
Yeah. So, my daughter, she's in her 20s now. So we revisit these conversations often. I remind myself that I learned better from watching my dad versus him, trying to sit me down and talking about it. So I get the question often where people are like, okay, I'm ready to do something about my finances. I want to build wealth. I want to get out of debt or whatever. And they're like, where should I start? And my answer always is start by organizing your finances so you figure out where you're at. You know, debt might be it for some people. For other people, it might be saving. For other people, it might be increasing your income. But just figure out where you're at, because there's a long journey ahead of you and there's no need to try to do it all in one night. A win would be to know how much you have in your 401k, looking at how much your gross salary is, which everybody knows, but how much are you actually taking home after taxes, after your health insurance? So just assessing where you're at currently, because then you will start to see the gaps. If you're making $250,000 a year and you still can't make your bills, then it might not be your income. It might be, what are you doing in between? If you're only making $30,000 a year and you're like, why don't I ever have any money? It could be an income problem. And that may be where you need to start. So just like take an inventory, assess where you're at, and start there. And when you do that, simply by figuring that out, that's a win. Like, give yourself the credit, the rewards that you deserve for finally focusing on your finances. That's a big deal, because most people, if you ask them what they make, they don't really know, or they'll give you their gross. If you ask them what they have in their 401k or their retirement, they may not know. Ask you about their benefits at work. So yeah, that's the advice I give everyone: is start by organizing your finances and assessing where you are, so you can start to see more clearly what are the areas that are going to have the most impact, or your areas of opportunity that you need to start fixing first.
And I 100% agree with you. It's like, I like to compare it to directions. Like,
Right,
you
right.
really can't get directions if you don't know a starting point. You need a starting point and the ending point.
Right.
So you need to know what you're looking like right now so you can determine how to navigate to what it is that you want.
Right,
Um,
exactly.
yes. So what are you doing now and how can the listeners keep up with you?
Okay, well, what I'm doing now is I am working on a book with Wiley called Fire for Dummies, and Fire is Financial Independence, Retire Early. So I'm very excited about that. And the main reason is that, Wiley is such a big company, um, and they have a lot more reach than I have myself or via my platforms. And I really think the concept of fire and the fire movement, I want that to be accessible and exposed to a lot more people. So I'm excited to get the Wiley audience, the For Dummies audience, to take a look at this fire movement, financial independence, retire early, and just breaking it down because when you start to pull back the curtain, it's really not new. I go back to when my dad would say, live on less than you earn. That's the big picture concept of fire. You're just speeding it up a little bit. You're optimizing things a little bit more. And with technology, there's a lot more things you can do. So I'm pretty happy about that. And I'm all over social media, Instagram. I spend a lot of time on LinkedIn as well because I'm a corporate girl. I came from corporate America, so I spent a lot of time on there just under my name. And the book will come out in April. So I'm just really excited to get it in the hands of people to kind of look at it and see sort of like a step-by-step guide on how this really works and for them to sort of step in um, their own shoes, use their own measuring stick. That's a big thing that I like to talk about as well. When I first, I guess, got interested in the fire movement, there was sort of an avatar or the early from the early beginnings, it was mainly white male, high income engineers, and I was everything but that. And so I had to put on my own lens. I had to use my own measuring stick to figure these things out. So in the book, I just give a lot of credit to making sure that you're giving yourself grace. The psychology of a money is a big thing that you have to kind of address before you start with anything. So, when you were talking about, some advice that I would give, it would be, think about your money, maybe your money history, and psychologically feel that you can do it and that you're ready to get started. So don't ignore that mental side of finances because it's a strong pull. It was a strong pull for me, especially growing up in poverty, and I had to get through those things in my own time. But when I did, when it finally clicked, I was ready to go. But until that psychological piece happened, I don't know that anything else would have really worked, or I wouldn't have been able to make the progress that I did. So yeah, I'd love to connect with your audience and have them take a look at the book, and just connect with me on any of my social media platforms, just under my name, Jackie Cummings-Koski.
How do you spell it?
It is Jackie, and then it is Cummings. Cummings is my maiden name. My brother hates when I don't use Cummings because that's the family name, but it's Cummings. And then the last name is Koski, Koski. And I guess one fun thing over the last few years, I adopted sort of a new screen name, and that is Phenomenal Woman, and it is giving homage to Maya Angelou, who's my favorite poet, and her most famous poem is Phenomenal Woman with a PH. So the way I spell mine is FI, like financial independence, nominal woman. So yeah, that's what I am on Instagram. So hit me up there. You can do it by my name or the Phenomenal Woman, giving honor to Maya Angelou.
Phenomenal woman, that's me. I love that poem. And I know we're supposed to end right now, but I do want to touch on a little bit your fire journey. I think that's important to kind of highlight a little bit when, and I will plug it in when you're talking about or after you share your stock, like getting started with stocks and then going back to the budgeting. So how did you get into the fire movement and deciding you want to do fire and that experience with achieving fire, all of that? If you could just summarize it really quick, if there's
Yeah,
no
yeah.
way.
Well, I realized that I was somewhat of a personal finance nerd after the investing club, but I would listen to podcasts. That's my preferred way of learning. And I remember there was only a handful of personal finance podcasts. You had Clark Howard, Dave Ramsey, Susie Orman, a few of those. And then in right around 2015, 2016, there started to be so many more. And they started talking about, there was like all these niches, like people talking about debt, people talking about real estate, then people talking about financial independence, then people talking about retiring early. And that's what got me. I'm like, well, I was into financial literacy. That was a big deal for me. I even, wrote a book just to my daughter called Money Letters to My Daughter. And after I did that, financial literacy was it. I wanted to teach younger people about it. And I never thought that was possible while I was still working a full-time job. But I was hustling hard. I was doing financial literacy workshops, education, speaking while I was still working full-time. And that was getting tiring. So as I'm hearing these people talk about financial independence and retiring early, that was very attractive to me. I'm like, maybe that's the way that I can cut out of corporate America and actually focus on financial literacy and education, because that's what I really love doing. And so I started with my numbers. I did my first net worth statement. I figured out my fire number, which was 25 times my expenses. And I kept giving myself every excuse in the world of why I couldn't cut out from corporate America. Oh, I would say things like, what about health insurance? Well, I'll find out a way to take care of that. What about getting money out of my retirement accounts early? Found a way to take care of that. And once my daughter graduated from high school, I didn't even have that as an excuse. So as I'm working on my numbers, I made some projections, had my nerdy spreadsheet, and I finally got to the point where I was able to retire. I was 47, but then I still wasn't quite ready. I had that one more year syndrome. And so I hung around for another 2 years. And instead of the 25 times my expenses, I got to about 30 times my expenses because I felt like I needed the extra cushion. So I officially retired from my corporate job in December 2019. And that was a huge shift for me. Mind shift, my life, my career, all of that. And ever since then, I've been talking about financial independence, setting yourself up to retire early if you want to. If you love your job, consider yourself very, very lucky because most people don't. And it's just made such a huge difference. So the financial independence retire early community, the movement, the people made a huge difference and got me to a place where I never even imagined I would ever be, from the little girl that was picking, blackberries, in the backyard and getting, stuck by the needles from the blackberry. So yeah, that the financial independence piece just really spoke to me, and it got me to where I wanted to be a lot sooner, and just put me in a position where I can touch so many more people. If I was still working the corporate grind, there's just no way I would have had the impact that I'm having now.
There's so many benefits to becoming financially independent, whether it's like an internal feeling or just the freedom you have to work on some of your passion projects. So to be continued. I would love to have a more in-depth conversation about how you achieve that because it takes a lot of discipline to reach 30 times your expenses and savings, right? A lot of people can't even come up with $500. So I'm sure there's a lot people can learn from what you did to achieve what you achieved. So thank you so much once again, Jackie, for sharing your story. I know
My
a lot of
pleasure.
I know a lot of people will benefit from hearing. And so yes, I can't wait for them to hear it.
Well, this was great, Melissa. Thank you so much for having me and giving me a chance to speak, I guess, in a meaningful way about sort of how I felt on my journey and all those steps. I don't get to talk about that much, but it was great to kind of have that talk with you. So
I'm glad you enjoyed it.